Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I'm Matthew Lucas.
And we post a video every Friday. So why not hit subscribe and the alert button so that you can keep up with our adventures week by week.
Absolutely. And if you have a burning question for Stephen Ryan, put it in the comments below with where you're from, and he, not I, will answer it in our Monday Shorts.
And I will do my very best.
Now, Stephen, I feel we're in familiar territory.
Yes, we're at my nursery, Dicksonia Rare Plants at Mount Macedon.
Okay. What are you trying to sell us, Stephen?
Well, today I'm going to try and sell the impossible, I think. Some time ago we did a video on Oxalis, the winter growing Oxalis. Yeah, here we go. You've frightened the dickens out of him already. And today we're going to do a similar video, but we're going to look at the summer growing species of Oxalis, which are, well, they still look like Oxalis, but they're a quite different kettle of fish.
Okay, well, without further ado, Stephen, let's dive in to your, well, one of your many obsessions, Oxalis.
Yes, let's do just that.
Well, here we are in your oxalarium. So we have visited your oxalarium at your garden terrarium, and I'll link that video. So here we are, and a lot of viewers are going to recognize these two immediately. Before we get into these though, what is the difference? And I know it's very obvious. What's the difference between the ones we're looking at today and the ones in our previous video?
All right, there's a couple of things. Apart from the fact that these are summer growing, the other ones are winter growing.
Yep.
They also tend to come from a completely different part of the world. So the winter growing ones tend to be more South African in origin. These summer growing ones tend to be more South American and Central American in their natural habitat.
And, well, how widespread is the Oxalis group then?
Worldwide, basically.
I mean, including Australia?
Yes, including Australia. We will have a look at one Australian one in due course.
Really?
But yes, the epicenters would tend to be South Africa and South America.
Now, I guess we should also just address the elephant in the room, in that in Australia, there is one that's gone mad, a South African winter growing and flowering one. What's that one?
Funnily enough, it's called Oxalis pescapri.
Pescapri.
Yeah.
So we'll gloss over that.
Yes.
But no, I think that the important thing, though, for us to state from the very beginning is the ones we're looking at are not weedy.
Well, they certainly haven't shown themselves to be so in Australia.
Yeah.
And if they were going to take off somewhere,
they would have done.
You'd think they'd do that here.
Yeah.
So they're all well worth growing. You needn't be frightened of planting most of them into the ground.
Don't be frightened.
But if you are just a little bit of a nervous Nelly, well, then perhaps you might just keep them as pot plants.
And I think before we go any further, we tried to make this video a couple of weeks ago when it was overcast and raining, despite the fact it's summer, and your Oxalis were displaying a very particular habit. So why don't we step back in time and talk about that?
Good. Well, Matthew, many a slip twixt cup and lip,
as they say.
We were going to do a full story on summer growing Oxalis today.
First observation, it's incredibly cold.
Yes.
There's no sun and it's been raining.
Yeah, exactly. And they're actually exhibiting something which is quite common to Oxalis and many other groups. Tulips do it as well. It's a thing called night tenacity, and it's the fact that in cold, wet weather or at night, the flowers will close.
Now, firstly, I didn't know that tulips close their flowers.
Yeah, at night, most tulips will close up until they get towards the end of their flowering season, and then they just give up the will, and so they just flop open. But yes, they will close up at night. And certainly the ornamental Oxalis do exactly the same thing. So this isn't looking at its best for today, but on a nice bright sunny day, which we will be involved
Hopefully
with, yes, before the end of summer, we will be able to do a full story on these beautiful summer growing Oxalis.
Now, what's the theory as to why they would close up?
All right, well,
particularly during daylight.
Well, I think it's to protect their pollen, basically. I mean, the weather's going to be cold.
Yeah.
It could be wet, so therefore the pollen's likely to get wet. And the pollinators are probably not going to be out there anyway. So the idea is to close your flower up, save all that you've got going for you till the appropriate weather can...
Put your best foot forward.
Yeah, exactly, until the best weather comes in. Yeah. And I guess to a certain extent, the closing at night may well have similar reasoning. The pollinators that might come and visit this aren't going to visit it during the night. And if any night pollinator came along, it's not going to take the pollen to where it wants to be because it's not organised for that. So I just think that night tenacity is all about protecting one's pollen for the appropriate moment.
Well, there you go. Well, I'm looking forward to sunny conditions where we can come and do this story fully.
Good.
Well, the sun is shining today. Well, actually, it's not now.
Just
but
started to go off, but anyhow.
let's hope they stay open.
Yeah.
But look, why don't we just talk about the two we've got? Because these are going to be most familiar to most people, including myself, who is not an Oxalis fan like you.
Yeah, but you're on the periphery and you might well sink into the mire of Oxalis.
Oh, well, you've led me
day.
down many a path, Stephen. Oxalis might be another one. So tell us about these two.
All right, well, these two are probably two of the world's most popular and sought after species.
Yeah, this one first.
This one is Oxalis tetraphylla, which means four-leafed. Tetraphylla iron cross.
Yeah.
So this form has this dark brown centre to the leaves, which is what makes everybody get excited.
Yes, and
this one is Oxalis triangularis, meaning triangular, which is fairly obvious as well. And this is one of the South American species, and it's become a very popular indoor plant worldwide.
now I'm going to grab your mothership plant of this because I want us to talk about pot care.
Yeah.
Let me put that one back. Ooh,
Heavy.
here we go.
Yes.
And there is the flower, which is a lovely sort of salmon pink.
Yes, beautiful.
Now, obviously, yours are in a giant pot because you're a commercial grower. So let's just talk about pot culture. These two are very popular pot plants. What's their life cycle? How should you best look after them?
All right, well, being summer growing, they'll need summer irrigation. They want a well-drained potting mix.
Yes.
A bit of slow-release fertiliser is normally enough to keep them going.
Like I'm an elf in a clover leaf.
Yeah, well, actually, you could just assume you're in a batch of four-leaf clovers, and then you'd be very Irish lucky, so to speak.
Back to pot culture,
Back to pot culture. So well-drained potting mix, slow-release fertiliser. You pot them up when they're dormant in the late autumn, early winter, and they'll pop up in the spring, start flowering by late spring, early summer, and will still be giving you attractive foliage right through until late autumn.
Yeah. Now, I have to say, I have that one, and mine often doesn't really go dormant.
No, so this one actually can become almost an evergreen species depending on the conditions you're growing it in. And certainly as an indoor plant, I guess the conditions indoors tend to be somewhat similar all year round. So maybe the plant just doesn't go for a rest.
But now let's just talk about dormancy because I have made many a mistake. So there's dry winters and there's dry winters.
Yes.
Now, some plants, some bulbs need to be bone dry. The soil is completely desiccated and it's just dust. Then you start again in spring. Now, some things, however, if you keep them bone dry, will desiccate and just disappear.
Yes.
On the spectrum of dry to not so dry, where do these bulbs sit?
All right. Well, if I've got lots of time and I'm cleaning my oxalis at the end of the season when they go dormant, I will sometimes tap them out of the pots, clean all the bulbs of potting mix, find all the bulbs, and actually store them in a brown paper bag in the shed until later in the year to pot them up. So they can, in fact, have that done to them. You can't do it with triangularis because it's not bulbous. It has a rhizome.
Oh, so hang on, this has a bulb.
Yeah, that has a bulb,
and
this does not. This one has a rhizome. So this one can't be dried out.
There you go, my little head's exploding.
Yeah, well, and it will, and we'll get a bit more explosion happening later with some of the others. So triangularis isn't a truly bulbous species, so it can't be allowed to dry right out. So if you divide the rhizomes, you need to pot them up again straight away and keep them slightly moist the whole time. But these can go as dry as a bone. If I don't get round to taking them out and storing them, and often I'll have stock left over at the end of a season, and those pots may well stay as they are for the next season because I can just feed them and oomph them up again. They will be sitting outside and they will probably get natural rain on them and things like that through the winter months, as they would do here, and they still seem to come back fine.
There you go.
So it probably doesn't matter.
No, actually, so here we've got a bulb and a rhizome. You're a commercial grower. How do you separate them? Do the bulbs?
Oh, the bulbs naturally fall apart because each big bulb will produce a cluster of little baby bulbils around it.
Yeah.
And those baby bulbils the following year will be decent sized bulbs. So you just have to crumble them up. You put all your little bulbs into one pot so that you can grow them on for another year. And then I'll take a selection of my bigger bulbs, pop them into individual pots and have them ready for sale that same season.
And the rhizome, so by seed? Or
no, again, you just divide the rhizomes because it's a branching rhizome. So it will sort of grow along a little way and then it will fork and you can just break off the pieces off the end and that will create your next major plant.
So here we are, we're getting down an alleyway of pollination. Now, the ones that have gone feral here, is that because they produce vast amounts of seed and off they go? So are some more prone to that than others?
Yeah, well, Oxalis as a genus very rarely produce viable seed unless you've got multiple clones.
Oh.
Now, Oxalis pescapri has become a serious weed in Australia, but we have one clone. We don't have multiple clones. It is a tetraploid or something like that. I can't remember how many ploids it is, but it's one of the ploids, which means it's quite a vigorous, big flowered, strong growing, large leafed form of Oxalis pescapri, but it's not exactly the same as what one will find in the wild. And it was probably selected originally because it was bigger leafed, bigger flowered, and therefore showier. Came into Australia and it has since spread strictly vegetatively ever since.
So
no seeds.
Is it producing seeds?
Not as far as I'm aware.
That's amazing. But so, wow, okay.
Yeah,
I'm processing this.
Yeah.
Now, my mum used to live in the southwest of Western Australia.
Yeah.
Full of it. It's here. It's in Tasmania.
Yeah.
And you're saying that is all by the rhizome being transported?
Or the bulb in the case of Oxalis pescapri.
The bulbs. The bulbs.
Yeah, so that one has a bulb underneath it and it produces lots of little baby bulbs, and about ground level it'll also produce lots of little baby bulbs. And all you need to do is walk through a paddock of dormant Oxalis pescapri, and just by kicking the ground with your foot, you can be spreading Oxalis bulbs all over the place. And you can imagine what happens if a farmer sends a plough through the paddock. All it does is spread it everywhere. So
how do you get rid of it?
Put a for sale sign up out the front and move.
You've said that before.
Yeah,
okay.
I know. Yeah, so but it is the way it sort of works.
All right. Well, let's look at some of your other.
All right. Well, let's look at the other ones of this one, just because I have more than one form.
Okay, Steve. All right. We're getting into nerd territory now.
Yeah.
So here's Iron Cross.
Yes. So that's tetraphylla iron cross. This one is straight tetraphylla, so it has the same pink flowers, but the leaf, in fact, just has brown chevrons through the sort of lower part of the leaf. So you can see how the leaf varies. So this is
different. Yeah.
This is the wild selection.
Yeah.
And then we have the lavender flowered form. See, there you go. It's a lavender flower form. And it also gets the slightly brown chevrons down towards the base of the leaf. So, and I'm sure there's other forms of tetraphylla out there. I want the white one, whatever.
So can I just make an observation? They're not that. This is like that scene in The Devil Wears Prada about turquoise. Well, they're so different.
Yes. Well, it is a bit that way. But interestingly enough, people will come in and they'll pick up Iron Cross without even thinking twice.
Yeah, as I did, because I'm just the sheep.
But I find it harder to sell these ones because their foliage isn't quite as dramatically spectacular. It's nice, but it's not as spectacular.
Yeah.
So they don't sell quite as well unless you happen to be a collector.
There we go. All right, let's look at the next one.
All right.
And the sun is disappearing. The leaves are closing up.
Yes, it's on its way down. Funnily enough, this one here is also triangularis, and I got it years ago as regnellii, and then they said it was triangularis subspecies papilionacea, meaning butterflies.
I was going to say papillon,
Yeah, Q would tend to suggest this is just a green leaf form of that one and doesn't have any botanical standing whatsoever. But certainly from a horticultural perspective, it's quite a different plant. And from a growing perspective, this one doesn't seem to get the nasty rust diseases that one gets.
Now tell me about rust. This one looks...
It's clean.
Yes. So you're keeping this in your shed to stop it getting rust. So what is the rust? What's the story?
All right, well, when you get rust on the Oxalis triangularis, and a lot of other Oxalis can get them as well, you'll find under the leaf it has these bright orangey yellow pustules.
Pustules?
Pustules, yes. I'm not sure that's the technical term, but they look like that. I'm quite happy to call them that.
Okay.
And it destroys the foliage. Now, you can get rid of the rust. I've tried all sorts of sprays and I've had no success, but if anybody out there does know what to do as far as the spray is concerned, I'd love to hear from you. But all I do is I take all the leaves off and discard them, get rid of the rust that's on them, and then I keep the leaves dead dry by keeping it indoors. So I keep it indoors, I water from below so that the leaves don't get wet, and that generally stops the rust from coming back again.
But it gets rained on in the wild.
Yeah, and maybe it gets rust, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe the rust is something that
That's
is
Australian.
Australian or from other parts of the world, but not from its natural habitat. That's how most diseases get around that affect plants. I mean, Dutch elm disease came from China, affected European elms because they weren't immune to it. The same happened with chestnut blight in North America. They took some European chestnuts to North America. The blight went with them, virtually wiped out the chestnuts of North America. So the same could be in a smaller way happening with these oxalises, that they don't get it in the wild because it's not there.
Well, if you're growing this outside of Australia and you do or you don't get a rust problem, let us know in the comments.
Yeah, we'd love to know. But interestingly, although this one that I got as papilionacea will get rust on it, it seems to be far less prone to the rust than the purple-leafed one. So what can I say? It is quite a different sort of plant.
It's rust-proof.
Yeah.
All right.
Possibly.
Let's look at some more.
All right.
Now, this is quite different. The leaf looks very different. What's this one?
Yeah, well, this one is Oxalis Stipularis, or at least that's what I got it as. I can't find much evidence of this species in any of the literature or online.
Now, for someone who knows your plant names backwards, there seems to be a lot of confusion around Oxalis.
Well, there is, because there isn't an up-to-date monograph, so you can't buy the book that will have all of the images and descriptions
Stephen
and
Ryan,
keys.
there's something for you to do on cold winter nights. The
Definitely
definitive
not.
Oxalis book.
No, I don't think so. So this one came to me as Stipularis,
Yeah.
and that's what I grow it as because I don't have a different name to give it anyway. And I love its leaf. Its leaf is quite like a Maltese cross. It's a beautiful leaf. The flowers are classical sort of mauvey Oxalis
different.
blooms. No, so the same. But the leaves are gorgeous.
Being sarcastic.
Yeah, I figured that. So again, this is a South American one. At least I assume it is, even though we're not dead sure about the name.
Yeah.
And it's found its way around Australia in different collections and things. It found its way into my vegetable garden. It seems to have stayed comparatively benign, and I'm going to lift it out of the veggie garden and sell it to somebody eventually.
The evil face of capitalism.
Yeah.
Now, so is this a bulb or a rhizome?
This one's a bulbous one.
So how did the bulbs get to your nursery?
Quite easy, because I take all my spent potting mix and rubbish home, and that gets dug into the garden or into the compost heap. And when I clean my oxalises, I've got to be very careful where I distribute that stuff, because I'm inclined to get some bulbs that I've missed will come up in the garden at home. And that's how it got into my veggie garden.
Well, I tell you what, why don't we step back in time or step forward in time and just have a quick look at your garden and which ones are growing well there.
All right, we'll do that. Now, here's a colony of Oxalis Stipularis that I mentioned before that's managed to come up in my vegetable garden. So it obviously moved from the nursery in some spent potting mix, and it's coming up amongst my perennial leeks, which are dying down at the moment, so they look pretty ordinary. I'll leave the oxalis there and enjoy it, and then just before it dies down, I'll see if I can dig it out. All right, we're underneath my espaliered peach tree in the edge of my veggie garden. So what better place can I think of to plant an iron cross oxalis? So it's growing in here in the semi-shade under the peach. It pops up every summer. I don't seem to have to do anything with it. I think it gets enough moisture from watering the things around it, and it just sits there making a nice neat clump, and it comes up through a little ground cover plant, a little tiny euonymus. So when it disappears, there's still some greenery there. So I don't even have a gap in the garden. All right, here we have a small colony of triangularis growing in my garden at home. Again, I don't think I actually planted it on purpose. I think it snuck home in some potting mix. And it's really interesting for a couple of reasons. One is, even though it's growing out in the garden, so far this year it hasn't shown any signs of rust. And also with different light patterns, the leaves actually get slightly different colours. So indoors you get that really purple leaf with the dark sort of mauve centre. When it's out in the open, it tends to not have that same differentiation in colours. So it almost looks like a different oxalis, but it is in fact the same one.
What's this magnificent beast, Stephen Ryan? Look
This
at that
is
leaf.
Oxalis magnifica.
Ah, it's huge.
Yeah, it gets a very large leaf and hence
such a
magnificent.
different flower.
No, it's the same flower. But having said that, it really is quite a pretty shade of pink. Look at that.
Okay, it is.
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
leaf, so is this the biggest of them?
Probably not, but it's certainly a large leafed oxalis.
Yeah.
It comes from Mexico, so
Yep.
it comes from the mountains of Mexico, and I think it lives up to its name. It does look quite magnificent. Its foliage is beautiful, and its pink flowers are lovely. I'm hoping this one's going to be a winner as far as sales is concerned.
Now, is that one a bulb?
Yes,
or-
that one's another bulbous one. In fact, probably There's probably only a couple of the rhizominous species that I've managed to get so far. So I have to say triangularis is probably the only major rhizome species that I grow that comes from South America. Yes, you can in fact strike them from leaf cuttings. So
Yes.
yeah, you could. I haven't tried this one,
thing.
but you just take the leaf out, pop them in, and they'll often produce roots on the bottom and then produce new bulbs.
Wow. Okay.
So,
Second mind explosion.
I might add though that it's not generally that necessary because most oxalises multiply by the
Prolific
bulbs
little,
anyway. And
growers.
that little one there actually is an interesting one that you've picked up. I got this from a friend. If you look closely, it's actually got quite pretty chevrons in the leaf. It's a very pale mauve, almost white. And because I got it
I'm
from
not
somebody
laughing.
else, yes, you are.
I am. I'm laughing.
Yeah.
It's so different, Stephen. Yes, it's so different.
No, it's quite similar. But anyhow,
Yeah.
I haven't been able to definitively put a name on it.
Yeah.
So if anybody out there actually does know, I've tentatively put latifolia on it because it looks similar to images I've seen of Oxalis latifolia.
Yeah.
But I can't be dead sure about it. So if anybody can help me, I'd really love to know if you've got a name for that little Oxalis. And I think it's quite pretty. So I got it from a friend. It had been in her garden for years. It had never moved around. I feel confident enough to grow it, but I just don't feel confident about its name.
Naming it.
Yeah, so there you go, and that's always the issue with Oxalis.
Now, you did mention there's an Australian one.
Yes, and I just happened to have one prepared earlier. So
Is there more than one Aussie one?
there are, but this is probably the only one that has some garden use.
I'm struggling. Let me get a little one. I'm struggling to see what that use might be. Oh, what that use might be, Stephen.
Well, and well you might. Now, this
What's
is
it called?
Oxalis magellanica, and
Oh,
believe it or
yeah.
not, this isn't in flower yet, but it will be by midsummer.
Oh, okay.
And it has gorgeous double white flowers.
Oh, double ones.
Yes, this is a
Slightly different
Yes.
to every other oxalis.
Yeah, now there are a number of double ones, but anyhow, this one is commonly called, or the cultivar name is Nelson.
Right.
Now, Nelson, or just straight Magellanica, is a really interesting oxalis because,
Is it?
well, the name will give something away.
Yes.
I'm telling you this is an Australian native, yet its
Yes.
name is Oxalis Magellanica. Now, Magellanica is of the Magellan Straits,
Yes, which
So-
is not in Australia.
which is definitely not in Australia, it's in South America. This oxalis for a long time was thought to be a couple of different species, and the Australian version of it was called Oxalis lactea, meaning milky.
Yes, because
And-
of the flower.
Yes, white flowers. And the South American one was Magellanica. Now, they've decided that it's all the same oxalis, and it grows in South America, Chile, southern Argentina. It grows in New Zealand. And so you'll find it in subalpine areas in lots of places in New Zealand. And you will find it quite commonly in Tasmania, but also quite rarely in the hills and mountains of Victoria.
Aha.
So
So it's kind of like a woodland plant.
woodland subalpine plant, it likes semi-shade. In fact, it'll grow quite happily in full shade as long as that full shade is also allowing lots of light in. It doesn't like dark shade. Its flowers are very pretty little flowers, whether they be the single or the double. The flowers sit virtually at leaf level. And this one's actually a rhizome producing one. It has fine wispy rhizomes and it's evergreen. So it's not actually winter growing or summer growing. It's actually an evergreen species.
So here's the thing. There aren't that many Australian oxalis, and
No.
yet in South Africa, which parts of southern Africa have very similar climates to
Yeah.
Australia, where oxalis have speciated like there's no tomorrow. Why hasn't that happened here? Why don't we have winter growing, summer dormant?
They just
No.
haven't got here. Somehow or another, this one has managed to get across the Pacific via New Zealand to Australia, or dare I say, maybe it started in New Zealand and spread in both directions. I don't quite know. But because we've ended up with the more alpine woodlandy oxalis got here, the ones from South Africa that speciated madly, which obviously do really well here once they get here, never got here way back. So there was never a chance for it to have ended up in Australia and then speciated like mad so that we could have ended up with a whole group of different oxalis species, which would have all been seen as natives.
To add to your collection,
Yeah,
Stephen.
exactly. Yes, I look forward to finding Oxalis australicus, Oxalis western australicus, or New Hollandica, but no, none of those things exist. Unfortunately.
Alas.
Now, the important thing to know about this one is how to use it in the garden.
Yeah.
Because it likes cool, moist, permanent sort of semi-shade, It's probably not a great pot plant because it's so small, but it is an ideal little plant that you could grow in between paving slabs as a little ground covery plant. It will have its little white flowers dotted across the top of it, looking all gorgeous and lovely. And the only downside to growing it as a ground cover is it stays so flat to the ground, other weeds can easily grow through it because it can get at the soil and the light. So things like bittercress and all sorts of other weeds will pop up through it. You do have to weed this plant, unfortunately, and it can be tedious, but it is really cute. So there you go, magellanica.
Well, Stephen Ryan, Oxalis 2.
Yes, and maybe there'll be Oxalis 3, who knows?
No!
It'll be like Star Wars, it'll get more and more boring.
Well, you said it. Anyway, well, look, I have both of these, and I feel a bit more confident. Now, I didn't know that this was a rhizome and that's a bulb. So there's two things I didn't know.
Well, there you go. You learn something every day.
Oh,
you come up and work
you are
with me.
just a font of knowledge.
Yes.
Font of knowledge. It is so beautiful. Anyway, well, thank you, Stephen, for taking us through one of your other sub-obsessions.
Minor obsession, I don't know.
Major, I think, or major minor. What could we possibly do next week?
Well, we'll engage with another group of plants or visit a lovely garden.
Oxalis.
Yeah, who knows? But yeah, I'm sure Oxalis will rear their little heads again at some point or another.
Well, perhaps. Anyway, well, look, if you want to know what we're doing next week, hit subscribe. We post every week on a Friday.
And don't forget to put questions in the comments below.
Yes.
Telling me where you're from.
Yes.
And on a Monday, I'll be happy to try and answer your gardening questions.
And if you're in Victoria, you should come on up to Dicksonia Rare Plants and talk to Stephen for hours about Oxalis.
Or any other plant you want to talk to me about. I mean, I'm not a one-track minded person.
No, you're not. But anyway, well, no matter what it is, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye all.